This is the curriculum committee meeting. It is April 6th, starting about 8:10. We'll just go around and kind of take attendance. I'm Erin Dowd, school board member.
Nancy Justman, school board member.
Laura Jackson, assistant superintendent of teaching and learning.
Jen Wimmer, superintendent.
Heather Delnick, assistant principal at Silverbrook. Erin Faust, summer school principal and WBVA coordinator for K5.
Heidi Spangola, district literacy coordinator.
Tani Schmidt, school board member.
Okay, and if you want to get us started on our agenda.
I sure will, thank you. Our agenda today, we're going to talk a lot, this is all really just informational and overview purposes to provide the curriculum committee with information on things that are happening in relation to our student learning. And so we wanted to take some time today to talk a little bit about our gifted and talented program. This is the first time the curriculum committee visited it this year, and in the 2017-2018 school year, we spent a lot of time talking about it. And our gifted and talented policy was revised at that time. Our handbook was completed at that time, and again, since that time, the administrator at the district office that had been working with the program is not in the district anymore. And Heather Delnick has been leading forward with our curriculum, with our gifted and talented program, our gifted and talented resource teachers. And so Heather, who is the assistant principal at Silverbrook, has a strong background in gifted and talented education, and is really at a pivotal time in students' lives to really understand what comes after, what comes before, and she's just been an excellent resource and doing really good work with the team. So she's here to talk with us about a little bit more about the gifted and talented program. We're just going to review two key curricular processes. We'll continue to hit on the curricular processes throughout the year, but just to review how we go about doing things so that the committee's always informed on that. And then summer school is coming up, and we have done work with our summer school resources and really looking at what we've been providing for students over the past. Now last year was different because all summer school was virtual. So last year we utilized different things than previous years. But we've gone over what we've provided for our educators and what our educators had self-created. And we'll talk a little bit more about our summer school resources. So this chart is from our Gifted and Talented Handbook. And it is just a good framing piece. You don't have the whole handbook in front of you. What you have in front of you is the section from our MTSS handbook that highlights more what Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 instruction for gifted students looks like. And this diagram was produced in 2008. It is a great visual. Some of the language, so RTI is what we used to call response to intervention. We now use the phrase multi-tiered systems of support, and it is throughout all of education. We use those multi-tiered systems of support. So we do Tier 1 instruction for everybody. Tier 2 gives students different than Tier 1, but provides what they need. And Tier 3 is our highest level of intervention, either serving students to advance them further who need different programming, different modifications to the Tier 1 curriculum because they're so advanced or because they have some gaps to fill. So this diagram really kind of illustrates that. In the center is our district curriculum. We have our standards in place, our instruction is aligned to our standards, and at this center level, all students do experience differentiation. So that's really like our Tier 1, Tier 2 level of assistance. Students get extra help beyond that. Sometimes that's a formal Tier 2 intervention, and sometimes they need even more. And so if you look the diamond shape is important because that intense level of intervention is needed by a few, not by many, but by a few. And so that diamond really illustrates that almost everybody, well, everybody gets the tier 1, and then the amount of extra support needed by a few is intense, by others it's lesser. Heather, do you want to add to that?
I think you explained it fairly well, that it's, you know, whatever's on the GT side is also on the special ed side, as Laura explained, just the extra support either on either ends of the spectrum is what the diamond's illustrating.
I know in the past, we've had some people concerned that maybe where the resources are put is lopsided. You know, maybe there's more resources put toward the right side of the diamond versus the left side of the diamond. And also, I know that there are circumstances where a child will test to a higher grade if they're very far on the right side of the diamond. So, I don't know if now's the right time to make sure that that's balanced or address those things, but.
I have a couple of things to say about
Sure.
that. First of all, you don't sit in one spot or the other. You can be twice exceptional. You can
Exactly.
be in
Yes.
multiple areas. The other piece, I think it's inadvertently reinforced through the budget terminology and codes that we are bound to use by the state. They will label things, you're used to seeing it as a 27 code, and it's labeled as special education. People make an assumption that that is special ed services. That's actually more globally comprehensive and includes all of student services, all your psychologists, your social workers, your guidance and counseling, things that go to all students. So I think that inadvertently reinforces that, oh, you're spending all of this money and it's going right here, like for a select group of students, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Are there intensive costs associated with individualized education programs? Absolutely. But there's also additional state and federal funding as well as legal compliance for those pieces.
And so it's really geared toward the student. So whether that student is twice exceptional or exceptional on either end, the amount of need is addressed. And so what that can cost to address that need can vary significantly, but you look at it on a student-by-student basis.
Thank you.
So Kelly Egan is currently serving our K-6 gifted and talented students. She works with classroom teachers to design interventions for students that can be utilized right in the classroom. And she connects with them, she plans with them. I was in a session at Silverbrook when she was co-planning with the teachers to help them address the student needs. And you always have to keep in mind, a student who's exceptional is exceptional all day long, not just when that resource person is there. So that the classroom teachers have to be equipped to meet their needs. And so Kelly will work directly with teachers to make sure that students have what they need to access resources for them, to provide alternatives, again, to co-plan. And then at the tier 3 level, so students who really need that intensive intervention, Kelly will design an intervention plan specifically for that tier 3 student.
Is that being addressed within the classroom, or are those students getting pulled out and taught separately?
So that will depend on the individual situation and can actually vary by the specific content that's being addressed. Heather, what else would you like to say about that?
No, I would just say that Kelly's done a phenomenal job meeting with all of the teachers at all the different buildings and attending their team meetings. I can speak specifically, I attend the Silverbrook meetings, for example, the math meeting. She's created Google Sites for all the teachers to use. For example, for math, it's aligned to each of the teachers' units of study in math, where the teacher, she'll go through with the teachers what's all on there. So if teachers are seeing, for example, in this lesson, these 3 kids are really catching on, okay, now instead of doing this assignment with me or continuing board work, you guys can work on this activity. So she has activities all along to what the teachers are teaching, kind of just digging in deeper, maybe more challenging problems that are already for the teachers. So she's working with the teachers on how to utilize those instructional materials seamlessly in their classrooms.
So it's really important to us that we have access for students for for the rigor that they need. And that's something the GT department is meeting on frequently and talking about what is the best plan for students to receive the rigor that's necessary. We have assessments in place. We utilize the STAR assessment as a universal screener, as it should be. It is our universal screener. That's not just a universal screener to say this person needs math intervention or this person needs reading intervention. It's not just a universal screener to have the classroom teacher be able to say, okay, as geometry is coming up, I can see these students really have this, or.
So sorry.
I was like. Or.
I thought I turned it off, sorry.
I realized I didn't turn mine off, but then I didn't bring it down either, so.
Oh, yours is just ringing at your desk then.
Yeah. Well, I thought I was gonna get caught because I had the 2-factor authentication. I was like, right over there, so I can't get on the computer. So it's not just used by the classroom teachers to help differentiate their instruction and pre-plan and look at their students' zone of proximal development. Our GT team looks at that to say, who do we need more information on? From the STAR assessments, where should we look deeper to see if, to make sure we're not missing anybody, and who may need more additional challenging material. So it truly is a universal screener used throughout the system. The GT team has been working on their differentiated education plan and being able to utilize EduClimber for that, so that the classroom teachers, all the teachers of the particular student, will have access to that differentiated education plan in EduClimber. And so they've been meeting throughout the year, working with students and families in particular to develop one that will be used system-wide. Because we want the information on it to be useful for everybody and to document what the student needs. In front of you is, again, the section of the MTSS, Multi-Tiered System of Support Handbook, that all teachers have access to, that describes what gifted and talented Tier 1 interventions would look like, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And that information will continue to be reviewed and revised. Heidi and Heather collaborated on making sure it was in there and accessible to everybody. What other questions do you have about gifted and talented resources? So I can talk about Susan. Part of Susan Sarik's role with the 7-12 students is to ensure that they're getting what they need. So at the high school level, with the course selection process, students can select in and go on a course path that aligns for them. One of the things we've had some conversation over the years with, and Heather and I were talking about yesterday, is we're at the course selection process for our 8th grade students going into high school and our Silverbrook students. And what's really important is to continue conversation and help our counseling team understand the conversations around course selection and how a child could, we want multiple entries, say, for math. So we've talked about a student getting to Calc BC. if at the Silverbrook level, they're, math isn't exciting to them at that point. And they're really, to try to do a year and a half math in a year's time is too much. And they're too young to accept that, but and they're not yet ready. Well, at 7th grade, 8th grade, they may be like, yeah, I love math and I can take this on. So what is their entry point that gets them through to the highest level of mathematics? And do you want to talk about what we were discussing with the counseling team and looping them in on that process?
Yeah, so we were just having a conversation yesterday about just making sure that it's part of our process as students, as 8th graders, start that freshman year course selection, to at least lay out in that meeting, if they're still meeting with a parent and the student themselves, that they could double up in math at that point and take algebra and geometry that freshman year, versus waiting to junior year and then trying to take maybe AP Stats and Calc AB together, depending on what their math course was. But just making that part of our course planning process, that we offer that to all students as another entryway, as an option at that point.
If you recall previously, it was a little confusing to people because of some of our documentation. It looked like your only entrance point to get to Calc BC was in 5th grade. And we know that we have to make it more known that that's not the only entrance for students. In talking with the 512 math teachers, that was something very important to them as well, that there's not just one entry point into advanced mathematics. And the idea of doubling up early on was something they supported. And again, that idea of multiple entry points was something that was, again, very important to them. Susan Sarek, another part of her role happens to be to work with the AP Advanced Placement courses students. With some of our, we have some students who are profoundly gifted in music, and so she has worked to make some connections with them to outside resources and agencies. And that is supported through our GT budget as well, because that's on student expense. That's, they are profoundly gifted in that area and really have taken some of our most advanced music classes as freshmen and sophomores. So continuing to provide for that, and so she has worked to coordinate that. Heather's going to switch back to Silverbrook after. So, are there any other questions for Heather at this time? Awesome. Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate you coming in, and really appreciate all the work you've done with the GT team. And I think we've come a long way in the last bit.
You guys have a great day.
You too.
Be outside.
Yeah. So our next topic on the, oops, I have these out of order. So I want to go through some key questions for our curricular processes before we highlight two of our curricular processes. One of them is our central belief that all students can learn. And it's our responsibility as all the educators and administrators in the district to find out what it is they need in order to learn. And we have some key questions that ground our PLC work, and that is essentially, what is it that students need to know and be able to do? How do we know when they know it? What do we do to get them there? And if they already know it, or they're striving to learn it and it's not coming, what do we do with it? What do we do? And so that speaks to knowing your targets, being able, having a well-designed plan, and being able to differentiate and assess. And so those are our key questions that ground our PLC work. And the two processes that I want to focus on today are our resource selection process and our unit development process. Our resource selection process We talked previously about standards and when the state has, develops new standards. I mean, this is several meetings ago, but when we were looking at the ELA standards, we talked about that process. And then, and we reviewed the standards. Then, once we're implementing those standards, we eventually get to the point for resource selection. So, we identify what resources are, we're going to review. So we've determined it's time to select a new resource. We identify resources for review, and then pull in all of those materials that we want to review. Once those materials are reviewed, we're looking at the alignment to the educational philosophy of the district, the alignment to best practice instruction, and the alignment to the standards or the learning outcomes that we have for the course. When we have resources that are well aligned, then we're also looking at compatibility, equity. If there's electronic resources, are they aligned to our system? So if there's ever a digital textbook or anything like that, Tim gets looped in and is asked to go through that. We look at the budgetary impact, and we look at the professional development involved and needed to implement this resource. So that is done with the curriculum department, with the teachers of the course, and or of the topic of the grade level. So it's if we're looking at a K-5 resource, it'll involve teachers from each grade level. If we're looking for one resource for that whole group, otherwise we may look by grade level at it. And so we do the public review. We don't do that and haven't done that for every resource. I think that we have talked about Proquest a few times, anticipating because that is going to expire. Proquest is the specific certification that our students in the culinary classes seek. It's used throughout the food industry, and it sets them up to be able to go to a restaurant and get hired and in the kitchen, and not just be doing minimal stuff, but it says they have these competencies. And so they're in the 22 school year, for the 22-23 school year, we'll need a new resource. And I had thought that it was going to expire for next year, and it's not. It'll be good next year and then expire the following year. But that's like a limited, that is what we're going to use, because that is like the industry standard. And if we put that out there for public review, we can do that, but I don't see us recommending anything but.
Well, why would it be a waste of everybody's time?
Agreed.
So, I mean, it's kind of like, it's the required piece. It's like the CNA test, wouldn't it be the same thing?
Yep.
I mean, if that's the state requirement, or whatever the testing
Industry
requirement is.
And I think what you do for, like I said, transparency in that is don't lead people down a sense of false selection. This is the
Correct.
industry standard we're using. Here's the links to where it is at the state. This is what kids are expected to do in the industry. To meet that, we're gonna make sure it's accessible and maintained for our students.
Right.
And we just link that so that it's there and people can peruse it. But like you said, there's no illusion of choice in that.
So not all things will come to public review because of things like that. I didn't bring the automotive text for public review, but I did bring that to you for approval.
I just think you just need to ask her, as you just stated. I mean, it's a simple, clear explanation. If people don't understand that, then apparently they probably have some other issues.
So we're gonna continue with that, for sure. Then, after public review, the curriculum department will come back and review information, share it with the board, and make a recommendation to the board for a primary resource. And then that serves two purposes, that recommendation for a primary resource. One is to be identified as the primary resource of the Board of Education. And then the other part of that is for the approval of the expenditure of the dollars. So that's really our resource selection process. We have our unit development process up as well for informational purposes. So our board policy 343.6 describes our practice around instruction and what instruction should include. And as we go through the unit development process, we review our master schema for instruction, which includes that gradual release of responsibility. So that idea that you're teaching something new to students, and you don't expect mastery on day one, but you instruct them, guide them, lead them to independence, and then you're expecting that mastery. So you're giving them the whole new overview, the guided instruction, the practice with support, and then the independence. We always, in our unit development process, identify the standards that will be utilized in the unit, that will be the focus of that unit of study. We identify essential questions. So what are those big overarching questions that we're getting to? These are not yes or no questions. These are kind of that big idea of what that key that key understanding that students are getting to. And I didn't want to use the word understanding in there because it goes beyond that. Then the next thing are those actual, at the end of this unit, I am going to be able to blank. Those are our key understandings. Our units will talk about how are you going to assess those key understandings. Some of them are through observational notes. Some of them because you're watching the student do, you're watching the student apply, you're listening for the accuracy of that vocabulary as they're describing something. Then you go into the specific learning activities, and from there you identify specific resources. Sometimes you have identified the specific resources after the assessments, and you know the standards, you know the assessments, so you know the resource you're going to use to get there. Now let's design the learning activities to utilize that resource. Heidi right now has been working with our instructional coaches and our literacy specialists so that as we go out and work with other teachers all around the district in a unit development process, they're leading it out in a consistent manner. Heidi, do you want to speak to that at all?
So it's been a very intense process, but I think it's going to get us to a high level of rigor for our students and be a really great thing for our system. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that we're aligned on what this process is, how we are really grounding it, and making sure that the essential questions that are grounding our work are really those big ideas that are transferable, that they aren't too narrow, that they just have a yes/no question, but we're really allowing students to get to that depth and that rigor of those units that our standards are asking for. So yeah, it's been really great work so far, and we're continuing it on actually this week. So
in May, we anticipate sharing some of the units of study work specifically to our literacy units of study that our K-8 students will be implementing next year, our teachers with our K-8 students. If you recall, we had in our literacy plan, the units of study process was part of our literacy plan we've had a slightly different focus with our just making sure that we are providing a solid education during the pandemic and meeting all of the student needs during that and allowing teachers time to plan. So we'll begin implementing that next year, and originally we thought we would be doing that third and fourth quarter of this year. So the team is just getting into planning it. We didn't want to pull teachers for obvious reasons during the course of the year. During the course of the summer, last summer, we didn't pull in teacher groups either. Not in as the pandemic was very active and our numbers were high in this county. So the unit development process will be consistent across the system, and I think that is important. As we move forward, our BYOC is sort of a warehouse for us, And we have other tools we can use for that warehouse, which would communicate our course overviews to the general public. And it is that BYOC is the place where the general public can go and pick a course and see the units of study in that course. For example, a 4K parent is looking ahead to see what is, what's covered in kindergarten. So they were just referred to go to BYOC, look up the subjects in kindergarten, and you can see the units of study. We need to have that available, and each August you're asked to approve the course overview documents. Right now that's housed in BYOC. Our high school, our 512 team has been working for about 6 years, I think, correct, Tim, on the implementation of Canvas and the use of Canvas. And so all of 512 has not been using it for those 6 years, but over the course of the last 6 years, they've been working to get everything in Canvas. And then we have other avenues that we can use where we can simply publish a spreadsheet that allows parents to access the course overviews. So we want to transition out of BYOC and then have that information. And in your, in the stack of things that you have before you, you have a course overview document that is simply a blank table right now. And that has the information that is currently available for the public on BYOC. And we would transition away from BYOC as the warehouse to this type of document.
I think the biggest takeaway is, years ago, BYOC was the only game in town where you could warehouse curriculum and make it transparent for public, all of that. That clearly, technology has transformed in a way. What we want is transparent, publicly accessible, searchable, ease of use, and now it just doesn't have to come with this kind of price tag anymore. So we can take what's out of there, and then again, make sure that we've got a consistent format for ease of use for the end user, because there's a public-facing piece. There's also internal, and some other things under development, but there's no reason not to then, once that's all done, vetted, approved, push it out, and people can have access to it.
One of the concerns, and I say this because staff may be viewing this at another time, that staff have shared is at one point assessments may have been visible on BYOC to the general public. So people could go in and print off a test before it was given. And so when we talk about assessment opportunities, we won't be doing that. And so the assessment opportunities will be how to be assessed, not the actual document or task.
I'm assuming then there will be a regular review of this so that this doesn't get outdated and the public is accessing information that's not valid anymore.
And with it being a Google Doc and the annual, we present it annually, it will be easier to make sure that that's maintained. And then how it's accessed and who has access to make changes to it and who has the responsibility. So that we were talking about the unit development process, as when the unit is, if a unit is revised, that would have to.
Like it would just be part of a step, it wouldn't get lost in the shuffle.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm gonna go back up because I had them out of order. So, before I jump into summer school resources, any other questions about the unit development process? So, summer school, Erin is working extensively with our summer school program and is getting it aligned, and so we put the courses out, but now we're digging into the resources that are used. And our summer school has been taught by We've had current teachers, we've had retired teachers, we've had teachers from outside of the district. I will say we have not provided a consistent resource for if we're doing summer school standards math, K through 7. We should be providing consistent resources and consistent materials, consistent expectations.
Consistent to the regular school year or consistent to what?
Yep, so consistent year to year in the summer school program,
Okay.
aligned to the regular resources. It doesn't have to be the exact same, but it should be aligned. So if I use a mathematics example and kindergarten math, and we're working on our understanding of number and quantity, that the same kinds of materials are used, same kinds of vocabulary, so that when it transfers well into the regular classroom, and they will have already had exposure to that in their previous settings.
It won't be easier, harder, or different. So like, for example, in
Yes.
high school, you don't want people saying, oh, I'm gonna take that class in the summer because I heard it's easier.
Yeah, so in high school, it's different because high school, it has to be the course that's offered. So in order to have credit bearing, in order for our 8th through 12th graders to be able to earn high school credit, it has to be the same course. And so they might use a different article or a different, especially like it may be credit recovery, it may be credit advancement. And so they might use a different article that achieves the same target, the same goal, provides similar information, and but it's the same class for the high school. In K-7, it's an extension of the school year, and it's intended, in the standards, it's intended to give the student what they need. So with a standards class, you may have a student who struggled in number and operations, or who struggled a little bit with comprehension, but you may have a student who wants to extend their comprehension. So the idea in literacy of being able to use level readers and work in small groups so that you have students who are striving to get down some of the comprehension skills they learned during the year, and students who are striving to exceed those, you can do that. So some might be harder, some might be easier.
Okay, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Or getting you there.
Personal challenge and growth is good.
Correct, that's what we're striving for in the days that we have them. So in our elective courses, like coding and some of those, we want to maintain that we offer coding. Here are the consistent resources that are going to be used year to year, and at this level and at this level. Cooking, we're not going to standardize that because like equipment fine, but other materials will change by the recipes. And we have problem-solving courses. So some of our problem-solving courses are is it gamifying?
Strategic games,
Strategic.
and we have a new one this summer that is escape rooms, which is really solving puzzles and things like that.
Under pressure.
Under pressure. Time bound.
So these are things that we expect to grow over the upcoming years, but we need to invest in the resources instead of just expecting the teacher to come in and create them for that. And so we want to be able to say that our summer school literacy program, if you are coming in, you have these materials and these resources guaranteed to you. And same thing with the math standards. So we'll be purchasing those for the summer school program. It's not a universal curriculum. It's not a primary resource, so it's not going to come for the board approval because of that. It'll come for board approval as the expenditure of the dollars. And really that'll be within the normal budgeting, the normal way we do our expenses. So we'll have a solid K-7 literacy resources. I think, Erin, if we would describe how we looked, when we looked at through all of the materials and that are provided for summer school, so let's just say second grade. If I looked in all of the second grade boxes that we were sending and providing to our second grade teachers, we really had materials from every resource we've used over the past few years. And we really had, like, I was like, boy, you could teach a whole year out of this and not run out of stuff. And we want to narrow that focus onto those key concepts that are necessary for the next year. And so not only narrowing the focus onto those concepts for the student, but then for the teacher, because the teacher doesn't have to wade through all of these materials. Some teachers like to teach it year to year, some teachers like to go every other year when they apply for summer school. And we want to be able to have, let's say, this is our second grade summer school standards program. What else would you say about the transition for resources?
It will be different for our staff because they have been expected in the past to provide the resources. And I think for the most part, they will be happy to have something that shows them exactly what the expectations are. Here are the resources. I actually have a roadmap now of what I should focus on versus I'm gonna do my best in what I think students need. We have a little bit more focus.
And then I think overall, as a district, by having those systematic processes in place, we can expect to see specific outcomes as a result of that. Any questions on summer school resources? Well, I want to thank you all for coming in and participating in the meeting today. Erin, anything else?
I don't have anything else. Nancy?
Nope.
Okay, motion to adjourn at 8:53.
Second.